Hi everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow out of Diagnostics. We're in the office today, not the garage, and we're actually doing a case study online by email to help out a fellow technician. Sean from a Toyota dealership reached out to me with a problem child, 2017 Toyota Tundra 5.7 V8 with a stubborn P0019 trouble code. It has to do with the timing for the bank 2 exhaust cam. Let's read his email. It's a long story with this truck. They've tried every avenue. He's reaching out for help, which is awesome. I'd love to help out fellow technicians, and let's see if we can make heads or tails out of this Toyota Tundra. Alright, so here's the email. A Toyota technician is stumped, and I taped over the email address there for privacy reasons. So this is from Sean. So let's read the description here. Like I said, this is a long email. You can pause the video and read it if you want in detail, but I'll just do a quick summary. So he says, I have a crazy case study and I think you'll enjoy this. You may be able to help me more than the Toyota engineers I've spoken to if you're up for it. I love a good challenge. Let's go. Here's the story. Customer states they submerged the truck in water. Their check engine light is on. Customer states the engine is making a strange sound when starting. Check and advise. Saga starts on December 23rd, 23. Pull the vehicle in. 2017 Tundra V8. Starting noise concern is the Bendix drive was failing from the water submersion. Replace the starter, now the truck starts reliably with no noise. CEL codes are 1604, 1605, 348, and a P0019. The 1604, 1605 is very common when the starter is failing. Okay, now the 348 and the 0019. 348 is a circuit code for the intake VVT. Easy peasy. Found that someone else has been digging into this truck prior to me, and they probably sent the customer to the dealer because they couldn't figure it out. The 348 was from another shop poking around at the camshaft position sensor to the VVT system. They damaged the connector body and the pin detents. Used an aftermarket pigtail, crimped them in, very poor repair. They damaged the connectors, trying to test for the 19 code. So he replaced both the exhaust and intake VVT sensor connectors, pins, soldered everything in. 348 was solved. I still had the P0019 populate after the harness repairs. I'm going to be as detailed as possible in case you see something here in the story that helps. Like I said, long email. I talked to the service writer and the customer. Customer states the water level is so high it entered the cabin on the passenger floor. Okay. Water came up to the base of the cylinder head on the passenger side. Sand sitting on top of the fender liners. Customer had a snorkel on the fender, so he had some overconfidence in the capabilities of the truck that he shouldn't have. Novice submariner. It's hilarious. After the harness repair, I test drove the vehicle, and the 19 code populated after driving for 20 minutes. 20 minutes drive. So I swapped the VVT solenoids from the passenger side to the driver's side, same part number, and test drove again. 19 came back. Changed the engine oil and filter. Test the oil pressure. Pulled off the passenger valve cover to inspect the timing. Toyota gives degrees of rotation relative to the cylinder head to determine timing position. I measured about 16 degrees, which is, to spec. Discussed with my team lead. I don't like firing parts at things, and what he said made sense to me. We commanded the VVT solenoid and it was functioning. We had known good oil pressure, working harness and sensors, good solenoid, correct mechanical timing, engine runs smoothly. He suggested replacing the exhaust camshaft VVT gear since it could not be anything else. So that right there, it could not be anything else. Do you guys agree with that? Let's keep reading the story. Alright, so Sean says, I agreed, replaced the exhaust camshaft gear. While the gear was replaced, I rebuilt the gaskets and seals and filters built into the valve cover for the VVT oil pressure. Distribution block, all was well, fired the truck up. After the gear replacement and the 19 set pending within 60 seconds now and no longer needed to be driven to set the code. So now apparently something got worse. I stopped the engine, waited 30 seconds, restarted, and the code set as current. Confirm code status now. My team told me to throw a VVT oil control solenoid at it. Same thing. Starts and sets pending in 60 seconds. Okay, so the parts cannon is getting warmed up here. He's firing the parts cannon through me, and enough is enough. I love, I love this. I rummage through the OEM tools and find a 2-channel picoscope in the room. Amazing. That's the right way to do it. Get the scope out. Whenever you see a timing code, get the scope out. Like, you can't accurately diagnose timing codes without an oscilloscope. That's the way it is. Because they're fluctuating signals, they shift by, you know, plus or minus 5 or 10 degrees will set these codes. And the scan data, sometimes they just disable scan data when there's a problem. So you can't trust scan data. You need an oscilloscope. The story gets better. Alright, so I bust out the laptop and struggled to find drivers and software. Finally figured out I need to get Toyota branded picoscope software installed for the OEM picoscope to work. I start getting captures. Crankshaft to bank 2 passenger exhaust DVT sensor, crank to bank 1, crank to bank 1 exhaust intake, bank 2. This engine is interesting. It utilizes a singular crank sensor, a camshaft sensor that is located on the timing cover reference to the bank 1 intake cam gear, and 4 VVT cam sensors reference to a reluctor pattern cast in the middle of the camshaft. Okay, that's good information. The 19 code sets from criteria, deviation in crankshaft position sensor signal and VVT sensor 2 for exhaust side of bank 2. And the criteria is, you know, it's off more than a certain number of degrees. So the ECM is testing the VVT system. Bank 2 exhaust camshaft is advancing further than spec or not advancing far enough. There are no data PIDs that share this self-tested data value or result with us. Only the code setting. In the picoscope captures, it created reference waveforms. Okay, but it's tough to do with a 2-channel scope because there's like, you know, 4 cam sensors plus the extra one plus the crank. So you need at least a 4-channel scope. Found deviation of 4 degrees and a part of the 2 captures line up perfectly. Okay. He says the exhaust cam gear has 24 teeth, which would mean at least 15 degrees of difference minimum if the chain had jumped. I called Toyota hotline, got on the horn with the engineers, shared the picoscope files with them, and explained everything I did already. They came back with some more granular tests, some of them redundant, but I obliged, gave them the data. They came back with more tests, I gave them the results. Man, I would not have the patience for this. They tell me it must be an issue with in the ECM. Wow, typical engineers. We obtained a known good ECM, swapped it in, programmed it, and obviously the 19 code still populates within 60 seconds. Reinstalled the original ECM and called the engineers. The engineers told me the timing chain must be stretched. Okay, that's the next thing in the parts cannon, and the only other thing left to do is pull the timing cover and inspect. All data says it's an 18.5 hour job. Oh my word, you better be damn sure that there's a problem behind the timing cover before you go in there. It's not exactly what I wanted to hear. I work flat rate, but I'm determined every master tech in the dealership is stumped. I pulled a timing cover, took a bunch of photos, confirmed everything was in time, sent the photos to engineers, and I was told to replace the chains. Okay? I replaced the timing chains, tensioners, and the works. Over-inspected every single gear, keyway, Woodruff key. I checked all the cam gears, locating pins. I wanted to be absolutely certain it is perfect when I finished. The timing chains and timing are set by colored links, and the links are equidistant. There are no wrong way to install the chains. Okay, well, we'll see about that. I get the timing set, everything installed, take photos, send them to engineers, get their blessing. They wanted me to double check a few things. I took the chains off again, sent pictures as proof, reset everything, and the final photos. I get their blessing. Reassembled the vehicle, cranked the engine, installed the fuel pump fuse. Now, 18 and 19 set as pending. No way, I clear the codes, restart the engine, they set as pending. Then as confirmed. Holy crap. So if this was you're working on this car, you're responsible for it. You do all this work, put it back together, and now the truck is more broken. Now it's setting 2 codes. What would you do in that situation? Alright, so he called engineers again, took a bunch of captures of the picoscope, took data log captures from mill off to mill on, sent them all of his data. They come back and me and say, it looks like the new chains are stretched. It's up to you if you want to replace them again. Ivan, what does that even mean? I cannot believe this craziness. I don't believe it either. I want the customer to leave with a repaired vehicle, taken care of, no parts canon charges, and because of management, engineers, and everything, this customer is having this experience and it's gotten out of hand. That right there, Sean, nails exactly what's wrong with the industry. Parts canon, management, they have to follow the book. I just had a terrible experience with the local Audi dealership. That'll be a separate video, but this is, you know, exactly along those lines. The only difference here is Sean, he's an amazing technician. He wants to actually help the customer out and not play by the book and, you know, say whatever, just collecting a paycheck and, you know, who cares if the customer is thousands of dollars in for misdiagnostics, all of these unneeded parts, all this unneeded labor. So he's reaching out for help, and I love that. That's how the industry will change for the better if we have more people like this working at the dealerships, okay? Let's finish up the story and we'll see if we can help him out. Alright, so he says, the only parts I've called have been the wiring harness repairs and the gaskets to inspect components. We don't have an 8-channel picoscope, so we don't have the tools to diagnose this properly. And I cannot let this get any worse for the customer. We were supposed to have an FSE, field service engineer, that's like the top dog, come out for this fiasco, and the guy doesn't even show up after waiting for him for 2 weeks. Okay, if you have some time, if this tickles your interest, I can send you all the captures, all of the test results. I'm really curious if you see something engineers don't. If you have seen a failure like this, something to jump off of, I don't think the guys at Toyota are as dedicated as I am to this. So I think, Sean, you're in the minority here. You know, people working at dealerships, yes, you know, being dedicated to the customer, to customer service, rather than just playing by the rules of the big machine. That's very refreshing to hear. And get the feeling they're quick to come to a conclusion, another test, and go on to the next phone call. Absolutely. 100% agree. A couple of them have been amazing, and it's nice getting compliment from them, praising my technical aptitude relative to other technicians they have spoken with. Not surprising at all. The questions I've had for them have been above what they've ever been asked, and they haven't been able to help with all the data. This was one of the reasons I wanted to work at a franchise dealer, because independent shop, I haven't had that access. All-Data Mitchell didn't have it. I wanted to get direct line to the manufacturer, so I never needed to turn a customer away again. It's happened 3 times in my career, in my 12-year career. I don't like it. Stepping back at the very core of it, ECM is performing a self-test. Yes, after replacing the chains, I have 2 codes now. So this is important here. After replacing the chains, I have 2 codes now, both in the same bank. According to Toyota, I should have the same waveform relative to the crank. 2 short pulses, 2 long pulses. Yes. Okay, minor deviations. Know what you think, Ivan, and if you're interested, if you made it this far, I really appreciate the time you took reading this email and all. Thank you for your videos and knowledge. You're definitely making technicians out there better, myself included. I know 5 other guys in the dealership who watch your videos too. My buddy from the shop joked about messaging you about this truck, and I didn't take it as a joke when he said it. Also, if you ever need anything from Toyota, feel free to reach out. Okay, so Sean here, he's asking for help, and I am more than happy to look at some waveforms and give him my thoughts. And like I said, I love that he's trying to improve, not just play by the rules here. So we'll see what how this saga continues, and if there's a resolution. I mean, it's a truck, and it has to be fixed one way or another, right? So let's see where this goes. All right, so here's my reply to Sean. Hi Sean, wow, that was indeed quite the saga. First question, was the P0019 present before the flood event? And the two tools you need, or two things you need to diagnose this truck 100% is 1, a 4-channel picoscope, and 2, a known good running 5.7 Tundra with no trouble codes. 2 things. And he works at a dealership, so I expect this would be pretty easy to get. A known good truck. Then take 4 captures with the VVT solenoids disabled at idle. We want the CKP sensor in channel 1, and then channel 2 and 3 will be the intake and exhaust VVT sensors. Now we need captures for the good truck, bank 1 and bank 2, and then the broken truck, bank 1 and bank 2. So the problems here are in bank 2 on the broken truck. And then send me all the waveforms, and we'll figure this out by looking at the waveforms, doing some measurements. All right? So Sean said, quite the saga is putting it lightly. I'm so excited to finally find the problem in this vehicle. I got the parts department searching for a 4-channel scope right now. Worst case scenario is going to wrath of corporate management. So again, he has to deal with this management stuff. Of course, I feel for you, Sean. I'm really hoping another dealer would let us borrow theirs. The parts manager laughed when he saw the price of the scope and told me he didn't think they would let anything out the door that expensive. According to the customer, light was not on before the submersion event. There's no help in terms of getting invoice from the previous shop. Okay. A known good 5.7 can definitely be had. I know we have something in inventory. To me here, it's funny that my parts manager laughed when he saw the price of the scope. When you see how much time, labor, and parts were thrown at this truck and how many people were involved, you will understand that the scope is very, very affordable. It's cheap compared to paying for all this. Let's see what waveforms Sean sent me. Okay, so it's this email from March 22nd. So it's been 3 months since the truck was first looked at. Keep that in mind. So Sean says he's excited. They finally got the scope in, and he said, screw it, I'm staying late tonight and taking some captures. Awesome, dude. I love it. So just to summarize here, he said it's a 4-channel capture. He has, for each bank, the CKP, that one CMP, the main one, and then the 2 VVT sensors. So the no good truck is 3URFE. It's a 2021, 20,000 miles apart. Okay. And he says, I took some very careful measurements in Pico, and I'm curious if you come up with the same conclusion. The measurements I took don't explain the P0019 repopulating, so that was the initial problem, but it does explain the P0018 coming up after the timing chain replacement. And I'm curious if you come up with the same conclusion. The measurements I took don't explain the P's. I'll leave it at that. Don't want to spoil it too much for you. Thank you again for taking a look at these. I'm going to try to send them to Toyota engineers in the morning just because they've been harassing me to get the case closed. Wow, so they're harassing him, but they can't offer any productive solutions. I wish you could see the look when they get them after saying the chains are stretched again, LOL. Also, the trucks are 20,000 miles apart. Okay, so let's take a look at these waveforms. Okay, so first let's start with the known good bank on the good truck. So bank 1 is good on both trucks, and I want to make sure they're exactly the same so we can trust the data and we know these engines are, the signals are exactly identical. So this is the CKP, that's the blue channel. Then the red is that single CMP, and then the 2 VVT sensors, intake and exhaust, this is for bank 1. So bank 1, good. Alright, so let's zoom in and pick the convenient revolution of the engine here. So you can see the pattern, it's kind of like a skinny, fat, medium, skinny, fat, medium. So right here, after the medium, that's where I'm going to put my 0 degree marker. We're going to go skinny, fat, medium, and there's my 720. Okay, so all the measurements are going to be based off of this red kind of reference pulse. Now, so let's measure to this pulse here on the intake, and then this pulse here on the exhaust. And we see about 76 degrees and 105 degrees. So that's what I'm going to write down first. Bank 1, the good 2021 truck, intake plus 76, exhaust plus 105, and the CKP, where does that sync notch start? At about plus 60 degrees. So I wrote that down for reference. Let's take a look at the 2017 bank 1 and make sure they're exactly the same. Alright, so this is bank 1 unknown or broken truck. Same exact cursors, same exact measurements. We want to get the same exact readings. So starting here, we're measuring to the intake and to the exhaust. Again, 75 and 105. That makes sense. And then if we measure to the start of the sync notch, we get exactly 60 degrees. So I'm happy with bank 1. We can trust this known good truck, the 21. So bank 1 checks out perfectly. Now let's see what we're going to find for bank 2. Alright, let's write down some numbers for bank 2 good truck. Again, we're starting on the same part of that reference pulse. So the CKP should not have changed, and we can prove that. I'll just put this cursor right here. We're at 62 degrees, that's fine. So now, just pick the closest pulse on the intake and exhaust cams, and it's going to be the rising edge of this one and the rising edge of this one. Okay, and they are 43 and 76. Okay, so I wrote that down, 40, 75, and this is still 60. Let's go to the bad truck. Okay, we're doing the exact same measurement on the suspected bad, bank 2 of the broken truck. So there's the intake, that's the line we want to measure, and there's the exhaust. So we get about 22 degrees now, and 70. Okay, so that definitely does not match what we got for the good truck. So we're supposed to be 40, now we're at 20. That's on the intake. That would explain the P0019 code. And for the exhaust, we're supposed to be at 75. Now we're at 70. Okay. So we're pretty close here, but we're way off on the intake. How do you explain that? So I want to take a look at the actual chain layout, see how that's possible, count some teeth. Keep in mind, initially the only problem was the P0019. Now, after timing chain replacement, the intake is definitely off by 20 degrees. And if the intake's off, could the exhaust also be off? But then the exhaust was off to begin with, so now it's harder to diagnose after all this work was done and parts are replaced. That's kind of the way it is most of the time. Alright, here we go. Here's a decent picture of this timing layout. So we have a long chain, so two long chains. This is going to the driver's side, that's bank 1. This is going to the passenger side, that's bank 2. Now, from the intake cam sprocket, we have a little chain going to the exhaust cam sprocket. So there are 4 chains total on this engine, 2 long ones and 2 short ones. We know bank 1 is perfectly in time, so both these chains are aligned. And bank 2, the intake is off by 20 degrees and the exhaust is questionable. It was broken before and it's definitely not happy now. And you can see here, like Sean was saying, there's this, it's really silly how they do this. It's like 16 degrees, there's the timing marks. So not exactly obvious when you're checking the timing. It's like, align it with the cylinder head surface. No, you have to like measure degrees or some silly stuff. But, so that's the layout. So can we explain this timing being off by a tooth jumping, or is there something else going on? There could be several problems now after this timing chain replacement. Okay, so let's first explain the P0019. This is a picture of the crankshaft sprocket, courtesy of Rock Auto. Great place to look at some pictures and count some teeth. So how many teeth does the crank sprocket have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 teeth. So for one crank revolution, we have 18 teeth. And that's 360 degrees. So if we do 360 divided by 18, boom, 20 degrees, and check it out, 20 degrees discrepancy here. On the good one, that pulse occurred 40 degrees after the sync notch. Now we're only at 20 degrees after the sync notch. So what does that tell you? Sorry to tell you, Sean, your timing chain is off one tooth on the bank 2 intake sprocket. I don't know how that's possible. I've never done a timing job on one of these engines, usually because the timing never goes out of time. But it's one tooth off. So this intake is advanced by one tooth. That's why the pulse is occurring earlier than the known good truck. Now, if the intake is advanced one tooth, what happens to the exhaust? There's that chain that links the two sprockets, right? And how many teeth are on this sprocket? I think he said there are 24 teeth. And if for one tooth off here, wouldn't you expect this to also be advanced by 20 degrees? But remember, we had that initial problem where now we don't know, we can say if this little chain is still in time, the whole thing should have advanced by 20 degrees, but that's not exactly what we're seeing. So let's take a closer look at this exhaust sprocket and camshaft. So I was looking at the exhaust pulses here for this VVT sensor. Now, at first glance, they look the same as the intake pulses. They're just offset in their own pattern. However, this is where the picoscope, you cannot replace this tool. look at the width of the pulses. Let's take some measurements. So the width of the pulse here, we're doing all measurements in crank degrees, 65 degrees, okay? An intake pulse looks to be about 60 degrees. Okay, let's go to the next one. Let's measure a few pulses here. 55 degrees. Let's measure the next one. 53 degrees. Measure this one here. Again, 65 degrees. What if we go to the good truck? Let's measure all the exhaust little pulses here on the good truck. So this one that we're comparing on the bad truck is, let's put the delta in here, less than 60. This one here, about 55. Next one, about 51. So what are we seeing? On the bad truck, the exhaust cam pulses are too fat. No offense to anyone, but they're just too fat. They're 65 degrees versus 55 degrees. That's why. How do you explain that? The intake one looks pretty normal, you know, less than 60 degrees duration. But the exhaust one is, all the pulses are just too wide. Was that the initial problem with this truck? And now, after the timing chain job, everything's shifted, advanced 20 degrees on bank 2. Let's do a couple more measurements and see if we're on the right track there. Okay, let's start with the good truck here, bank 2. So just this one pulse occurring after our 0 mark. What is the falling edge and the rising edge? I want both edges because now the width of the pulse is also a variable. So the falling edge is at, I would say, about 19 degrees, and the rising edge is at 76. Okay? So I wrote that down. Falling edge is at 19, rising edge is at 75. Okay. What about the bad truck? Well, falling edge is at +5, and the rising edge is at +70. So that's close, but that's way off, because now the width is also a factor. So from 19 and 75, we went to 5 and 70. So let's say that physically this camshaft is also 20 degrees advanced as the intake is. I'm just going to say that. If the pulses were the correct width, and this is our known good, and you advance it by 20, they should be around 0, so 19 should go to 0, and 75 should go to 55. That's what I would expect if the camshaft position sensor was reporting accurately, and if the camshaft was OEM. So I don't think anyone swapped the camshaft out, but it seems like someone might have put in an aftermarket camshaft position sensor, this VVT sensor, on bank 2 exhaust. That's the only way I can explain the pulses, the width actually changing from OEM spec. So there's two issues now. One, bank 2 primary chain advanced, that advances both cams. It's one tooth advanced. That's problem number one, so he has to, take the timing cover off again and reset the timing. Now, the P0019 initially, it looks like by the data, was caused by bank 2 exhaust pulses being 10 degrees too fat. And the only way I can think of, the most likely way, is the CMP not being OEM. What does this non-OEM camshaft position sensor do to the signal? So it looks like it delays the falling edge by 5 degrees. That's why here, instead of 0, we were at +5, so it delayed it a little bit. But it also stretches the pulse by about 10 degrees. Okay, so instead of 55, now we're at 70. So you can see this, it's not as clear cut as going from 40 to 20. like the rising edge is off by 15 degrees, but the falling edge is only off by 5 degrees because the pulse was stretched out. Crazy stuff. Those are my findings. Do you guys agree with that? Just according to this data. So these captures should have been taken before anything, was torn apart on the engine. And, the engineers and the managers hopefully will learn something. I doubt they will, but hopefully they'll learn something from this case study. They'll learn that the picoscope, or a good 4-channel oscilloscope, is worth its weight in gold. It's not expensive. Not after this. After how many times, tearing that valve timing cover off? Sean has probably more than a week's worth of work into this thing, plus calling, the tech support lines and the engineers and whatever, when this capture tells you what you should chase, right? Like these cam sensors, you easy swap around. You could swap them around, take another capture. If the pulse widening effect follows that sensor, yeah, you bet that sensor is bad. I'm assuming it's not OEM. So Sean will get back to me with the final results. I'm really curious now, and we'll wrap up this interesting case study.